Hello, my friend. Welcome to Dreamy Nights. It has been a long day, and the night has opened its quiet arms at last. In this gentle corner of time, there is nothing to fix, nowhere to hurry, only a soft drifting into stillness. Tonight's story is a slow tide of moonlight and water, a quiet voyage across a calm sea, where old memories glow like lanterns on the waves. So let the world soften at the edges, allow the breath to loosen and rest beside this whispered tale. When the heart is ready, the journey of the moonlit mariner begins. Far from crowded harbors and noisy docks, a single ship rested upon an easy, breathing ocean. The water was not restless, only rising and falling in long, unbroken swells that shone like brushed silver beneath the moon. Every movement was slow, unhurried, as if the sea itself had decided to pause and dream for a while. The wooden hull, weathered and patient, sighed softly each time a wave touched its side, a sound like an old book closing with care. Above this floating sanctuary, the sky stretched in a velvety dome of deep blue and faint stars. Moonlight poured down in wide, gentle beams, painting the deck in pale, cool radiance. Ropes hung in easy arcs, their fibers rough and familiar, holding the ship in quiet balance. Each knot, each coil of line carried the faint salt scent of distant journeys, now softened by time. At the center of this calm, the moonlit mariner stood near the rail hands, resting on the worn wood. The mariner's coat bore the marks of many seasons' threads, a little frayed fabric warmed by countless nights of sea air, yet it lay comfortably across shoulders that knew the weight of the waves. No storm lived in the mariner's gaze tonight, only reflection like a tide turned inward. In the stillness, the mariner listened to the ocean's quiet murmur, the soft creak of planks, the tiny tapping of water against the hull. Nearby, a single lantern hung from a curved iron hook beside the cabin door. Its glass, slightly clouded from age, held a small, steady flame. The light inside did not flare or flicker wildly. It glowed with a tender golden patience, letting warmth spill over the deck in a gentle circle. Where it touched the wood, the grain of the planks seemed to rise into view, rings and lines like stories written by time. The mariner reached out fingers, brushing the lantern's cool metal frame. The touch was careful, unhurried, as though acknowledging an old companion. A faint warmth from the lantern seeped into the mariner's fingertips, balancing the cool kiss of the night air on exposed skin. In the distance, a seabird gave a single drowsy cry, then fell silent again, as if the sky itself had turned down the volume of the world. Beyond the edge of the ship, the horizon lay like a soft silver line, where sea and sky met and mingled. No harsh lights disturbed it. No sharp shapes broke its smoothness. Just a band of quiet brightness, as though the moon had drawn a boundary made of light separating the waking world from this realm of rest. The mariner let the gaze linger there, feeling thoughts grow slower, like waves traveling farther apart. The deck beneath worn boots was firm yet kind, its boards sanded smooth by years of footsteps and the caress of salt wind. Each step the mariner took made a faint, hollow sound, barely more than a whisper. It was not the sound of work or haste. It was the sound of presence, of simply being here in this night that asked for nothing. A light scent of tar and pine resin floated up from the ship's seams, mingling with the salty air to create a fragrance that spoke of journeys without urgency. The mariner moved toward the bow where a coil of rope lay neatly arranged. The rope was thick, its fibers slightly rough to the touch, yet there was a softness where it had absorbed moisture and moonlight over many nights. Kneeling slowly, the mariner let fingers slide along the coil, feeling the gentle scratch and give of each strand. It was a simple act, a quiet inventory of textures and memories that lived in them. Nearby, a small brass compass rested on a crate, its lid open. Moonlight slid across its surface, catching on the faint tarnish and the tiny etched markings inside. The needle stood almost still, trembling only a fraction with the movement of the ship. Tonight, direction did not seem to matter. The sea was not a map to be solved, but a field of silver calm stretching in every direction. The mariner reached for the compass, lifting it carefully. The metal was cool, carrying the chill of the night, but the familiarity of its weight offered quiet reassurance. Thumbs brushed the edge of the case, following the soft curve that had fit into the same hands for years. With a small, unspoken gesture, the mariner closed the lid, letting the click of metal meeting metal settle into the silence like a gentle period at the end of a sentence. From the cabin, a thin line of warmer light escaped beneath the door. It cast a delicate glow across the threshold, where the grain of the wood deepened and grew more golden. The mariner stepped toward it, boots moving in rhythm with the ship's slow rise and fall. Each step felt like breathing with the ocean, a shared, unhurried pattern of up and down, in and out. Inside the cabin, the air was thicker with warmth and quiet. A small oil lamp burned on a narrow table, its flame steady. The glass chimney casting soft, rounded shadows on the walls. The scent of oil, faintly herbal, mingled with the salt that had seeped into every surface. The mariner closed the door without haste, letting the latch fall into place with a muted, reassuring sound. On the table lay a worn logbook bound in dark, softened leather. Its cover bore the marks of many hands and many nights' edges, smoothed corners bent a faint sheen where fingers had often rested. Beside it, a simple cup waited, carved from pale wood and stained by countless servings of tea. The mariner's hand reached for the kettle, suspended over a small shielded flame in the corner. The kettle's metal surface reflected tiny bits of lamplight in curved, gentle shapes. Inside, water whispered softly, a small private conversation of rising warmth. When it was ready, it did not shriek or clamor. A slow, deepening murmur told its story. The mariner wrapped a cloth around the handle and lifted it with care, feeling the subtle pull of weight and heat. Steam began to curl upward as the water poured into the waiting cup. The sound was a delicate thread, a softened rush as liquid met wood and settled. A faint aroma rose, something herbal and calm, with hints of mint and a trace of sweetness, as if leaves had captured a memory of sunlight and were releasing it now into the night. The mariner watched the surface of the tea quiver, then, still reflecting both lamp and moonlight through the small porthole above. Taking the cup in both hands, the mariner stood for a moment in the middle of the cabin, feeling warmth seep slowly into cold fingers. The contrast was gentle, an unspoken reminder that even the coolest nights held pockets of comfort. Outside, the muffled sigh of waves continued, a steady, dependable rhythm that wrapped itself around the ship like a soft blanket. The mariner drew in a slow breath of salted air mixed with tea and oil, and let it leave the lungs in a long, quiet exhale. On one wall of the cabin, a small chart was pinned beneath thin brass tacks. Its surface was dotted with careful ink marks, lines tracing old routes and distant shores. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, and the ink had faded in places, but the care in each stroke remained clear. The mariner lifted a hand, fingertips hovering just above one of the lines, tracing its shape without touching, following a remembered path across the painted sea. These journeys, once urgent, now felt like stories, whispered to the ocean for safekeeping. There were no deadlines in the ink anymore. No pressing arrivals, only gentle arcs connecting one quiet place to another. The mariner's mind, once filled with calculations and charts, now moved more slowly, like a tide smoothing sharp edges from stones. Every place visited became less a destination and more a soft light in memory, illuminating the present moment with quiet familiarity. The ship gave a slow, contented sway, and the lamplight answered by shifting almost imperceptibly on the walls. Shadows of ropes and beams moved in lazy arcs, never rushing, never startling the eye. The mariner took a seat on a simple wooden bench beside the table, the wood beneath easing into the shape of a body that had rested there many times before. Hands curled around the warm cup, feeling its heat spread through palms and into wrists, as if the warmth were traveling gently toward the heart. Outside the porthole, the moon's reflection drifted along the surface of the sea. Its bright path stretched out like a shimmering road, not demanding to be followed, merely existing as a peaceful possibility. Now and then, a small ripple passed through the reflection, breaking it into silvery fragments that rejoined effortlessly afterward. The mariner watched this soft, continuous, mending feeling thoughts echo the same pattern, small disturbances followed by quiet coming together. In the hush of this first night moment, the ship was more than wood and sail. It was a cradle on the water, a place where stories could rise gently from the depths without urgency or demand. The mariner, wrapped in the familiar textures of coat and cabin, let the weight of the day dissolve into the low murmur of the sea. Outside, the silver horizon continued to glow, holding open a calm corridor of time where nothing was lost, only resting. The lantern in the cabin burned steadily, its small flame a patient witness. Beyond its circle of light, shadows softened into a velvety blur, inviting the mind to loosen its grip on detail. The mariner took another slow breath. The scent of tea and salt and warm oil, weaving together into a comforting veil. Thoughts grew quieter, like waves, flattening into long, polished swells beneath the moon's gaze. In this quiet beginning, the ocean waited kindly. Its depths held countless memories, unhurried and undemanding, ready to surface when the night was ready to receive them. For now, it was enough that the mariner rested ship, anchored in a sea of silver calm, held in the gentle balance of wood water and sky. The first soft page of the Moonlit mariner's lost tales had turned, and the night content settled a little deeper around the sleeping waves. The night had settled more deeply around the ship, like a cloak drawn a little closer to the shoulders of the sea. Outside the cabin, the air had grown cooler, but not harsh. It carried the soft mineral scent of open water and a faint trace of distant kelp. The moonlit mariner rose from the bench fingers, releasing the warmth of the wooden cup, and listened for a moment to the muffled hush of waves against the hull. The ship breathed with the ocean, a slow, dependable rhythm, and in that rhythm, the mariner heard an invitation to return to the deck where lanterns waited to wake. The latch of the cabin door moved with a quiet familiarity as the mariner lifted it. When the door opened, a spill of lamplight reached ahead, stroking the deck in a widening path of gold that gradually thinned and merged with moonlight. Cool air greeted the mariner's face, brushing the skin with a touch that felt both alive and gentle. The sound of the sea grew clearer, the soft rush of small waves, the occasional hollow echo from beneath the planks, and far away, the single slow call of a gull already half dreaming on some hidden perch. Above, the sky had deepened into a near black velvet, with stars scattered in a pattern that seemed both random and perfectly placed. The moon, round and watchful, poured its pale radiance onto the open water, turning every ripple into a line of liquid light. Near the rail, the first lantern still glowed softly, its warm circle of light cradling a patch of deck in gold. But further along the ship, other lanterns hung in shadow, their glass dark, their metal frames quiet and cool. The mariner stepped toward the nearest unlit lantern booths, making a gentle hollow rhythm on the boards. The ship answered with a slight sway, as though adjusting itself in the cradle of the water. Reaching up, the mariner let fingertips curl around the lantern's handle. The metal felt smooth in places, rougher where salt had dried and settled into fine grains along the edge. The lantern swayed a little with the touch, its small movement mirrored by the faint creak of the chain that held it. From a pocket within the mariner's coat, a small tinderbox emerged, edges rounded by years of use. The lid opened with a soft, familiar sound, revealing flint and steel and a few carefully protected scraps of tinder. Each piece carried the faint, comforting scent of charred wood, a memory of earlier flames now resting as ash and possibility. The mariner cupped hands around the lantern, shielding the space where light would soon live, creating a little hollow of darkness in which the first spark could safely bloom. The scrape of flint against steel was quiet, almost shy. A tiny flash appeared, then vanished until one ember caught the dry fibers and began to glow a point of orange, deepening into red. The mariner breathed on it gently, a slow, steady exhale that encouraged the ember to brighten. Soon, a thin, wavering flame rose, licking at the wick within the lantern, and the glass slowly began to glow from the inside, as though waking from a long, peaceful rest. Warm light spread outward, softening the shadows along the rail. The deck beneath the lantern seemed to step forward out of the night, its grain becoming visible, its knots and lines quiet but clear. The mariner watched for a moment as the flame settled into a steady, unhurried burn, its small movements sending specks of brightness dancing in the metal rim. The scent of warmed oil drifted up, mingling with salt and wood, creating a fragrance that felt almost like a memory of every night the ship had ever known. One by one, the mariner moved along the deck, repeating the gentle ritual. Lift a lantern, feel the cool weight of it. Open the small door with its familiar latch. Coax the flame from spark to glow. Each lantern answered with its own circle of golden light, adding its voice to the quiet chorus of the ship. Soon the rail was lined with orbs of warmth, their reflections trembling softly on the slow-moving waves below. The ship now held two kinds of light, the moon's pale silver and the lantern's gentle gold. Where they met on the wet shine of the hull, and the ripples of the sea colors mingled into soft gradients, cool blue fading into warm amber, then dissolving again into shadow. The mariner paused at the bow, both hands resting on the railing, and looked down at this tapestry of shifting reflections. It was as if the ship floated between two skies, one above, one below, both full of patient stars and quiet fire. In this softened glow, the wood of the ship seemed almost alive with memory. The planks bore faint scratches and smoothed indentations where boots had walked, where hands had steadied themselves, where coiled ropes had rested in patient spirals. Every mark felt gentle now, its sharpness worn away by time and the tender polishing of countless tides. The mariner's fingertips traced a small groove along the rail, feeling the subtle dip and the rise, like the changing cadence of a story told many times. The lanterns along the tide began to feel like markers of remembered moments. One flicker recalled a distant evening when the sea was the same soft glass and the sky glowed with a different moon. Another seemed to hold the echo of a quiet conversation once carried out under these very beams, words forgotten, but warmth still lingering. The lights did not force these memories forward. They simply offered a space where they might gently return if they wished. Beneath the ship, the water moved in slow, silent patterns, touching the hull with careful hands. Occasionally, a small swell passed by, and the reflections of the lanterns stretched and thinned, as though the sea were lightly brushing the image away before painting it back again. The mariner watched this dance, noting how nothing remained rigid. Even light was allowed to bend, to lengthen, to soften. It felt like a quiet reminder that all things could be held lightly, even the stories carried in the heart. A faint breeze drifted across the deck, bringing with it a cooler strand of air from further out over the open water. It stirred the edges of the mariner's coat, lifted a few loose strands of hair, and set the lantern flames to a slow, synchronized sway. They did not fight the movement. They leaned with it, tilting and returning their glow, pulsing gently as their glass chimneys breathed with the night. The mariner inhaled deeply, letting the coolness fill the lungs, then exhaled into the golden air, the breath vanishing into the mix of salt and lamplight. Somewhere near the stern, a small rope knocked softly against a cleat, tapping in gentle rhythm with the ship's motion. The sound was modest, a tiny percussive note in the larger song of the sea. It joined the hushed sigh of the water, the occasional murmur of wood, and the faint whisper of flame moving behind glass. Together, they formed a kind of lullaby not composed, but simply arising from the ship's quiet life, walking slowly back toward the center of the deck. The mariner let fingertips brush each lantern in passing. The metal frames had grown warmer where the flames had been burning a little longer. Each touch carried a slight heat, a reminder that something small and bright was alive inside. The glass surfaces felt smooth and firm, faintly misted at their edges, where the difference between inner warmth and outer cool had gathered in tiny droplets. In those droplets, the light fractured into tiny glimmers, like miniature stars clinging to the lanterns for a moment before disappearing. The mariner paused beside one lantern whose light fell directly onto the ship's name carved into the wood near the bow. The letters, softened by years of salt and wind, were filled with shadow and gold in alternating strokes. The name itself, once spoken with authority in busy harbors, now seemed like a quiet promise whispered between the vessel and the sea. The mariner traced one letter lightly, feeling the shallow recess beneath the fingertip, acknowledging the long companionship between sailor and ship. In this soft corridor of floating lights, the mariner's thoughts drifted without effort. The mind visited old waters, but in memory, they held no storms, only surfaces that shone under varying skies. Dawns tinted with rose afternoons, bright and clear. Nights like this one, filled with silver and gold. Faces once met along distant shores did not surge forward. They glowed at the edges of recollection, kind and indistinct, like silhouettes seen through fog. There was no urge to grasp at them, only a gentle gratitude that they had existed. The lanterns continued to sway, keeping their quiet vigil along the rail. They seemed to mark not just the ship's edge, but the boundaries of a floating sanctuary. Beyond their glow, the ocean stretched out in infinite calm. But within their circle, a smaller world existed, intimate, contained, and safe. The mariner remained still for a while, simply resting in this feeling of being held between light and water. At length, the mariner returned to the first lantern that had been lit. Its flame had settled into a steady, untroubled burn. The wick dark at the base, bright at the tip. The surrounding air was just a degree warmer, and the smell of oil was slightly stronger here, a gentle testament to its long-standing service. The mariner watched the flame's small movements, the way it narrowed and widened with each subtle breath of the night. This line of lanterns along the tide became a necklace of memory. Each point of light, a small story on the verge of surfacing. Some were tales of simple evenings spent watching stars rise, others of solitary passages across vast expanses of water where only the ship and sky kept one another company. There might have been laughter once, soft and easy, or songs hummed without needing to be remembered word for word. Now, all those moments seem to sink gently into the present, not as weight, but as softness. The ocean beneath remained patient and inscrutable, but not distant. Its surface caught the lantern's warmth and sent it back in trembling patterns, as if the sea were answering in its own language of light. From time to time, a tiny patch of phosphorescence flickered just below the surface, a pale green glow winking into being before fading away. These small bursts of underwater luminescence felt like the deep replying to the mariner's quiet presence on the surface. The ship drifted along the subtle currents, not fighting them, not hurrying. Its movement was so smooth and gradual that it almost seemed to be still motion measured only by the slow shift of stars and the changing angles of reflections on the water. The lanterns carried along with the ship cast their circles of light upon ever new patches of sea, blessing each small space before moving on. The mariner took comfort in this, the idea that one could move through the world leaving nothing disrupted, only gently illuminated. Above, a thin veil of clouds began to pass across the face of the moon, dimming its brightness just slightly. The result was not darkness, but a softening of contrast, as though the sky had drawn a sheer curtain across its own radiance. Under this gentler glow, the lantern's warmth grew more prominent, their gold deepening while the silver of the sea grew quieter. The mariner felt the shift as a subtle invitation to turn inward, to let the outside world gently blur. Leaning once more against the rail, the mariner closed the eyes for a moment, listening. Lanterns hummed softly with their small, steady flames. Water stroked the hull in a never-ending soothing pattern. The ship, the sea, and the sky all seemed to breathe together in a rhythm too slow to measure, yet easy to feel. In the hush created by this shared breath, the first of the moonlit mariner's lost tales began to rise from the depths of memory, not with urgency, but with the gentleness of a tide pushing a single shell toward shore. It hovered at the edge of awareness, patient, waiting for its turn to be unfurled under the watch of these golden lights. The lanterns along the tide had done their work. They had carved out a safe, luminous path for stories to return. Wrapped in their glow, the mariner allowed the mind to quiet even further, ready to receive whatever the night chose to offer next. The ship continued its slow glide over the calm ocean lanterns, swaying like small suns, caught in an endless dusk. The sky, the water, and the wood all shared a single spacious silence, deeper and more peaceful with each passing moment. In this softened world, nothing pressed forward and nothing pulled away. Everything simply rested in its place, luminous and calm. The mariner stood within it all, a still figure among moving lights, carried gently toward the waiting stories. The horizon had softened into a haze of pearl gray, and the air around the ship shimmered faintly with a mist that caught the light of the lanterns. It was not a heavy fog, but a fine veil of sea breath, cool, tender, and slightly sweet with salt. Through it, the moon hung like a pale lamp in the sky, and far off in the distance, another light began to pulse, in reply, the slow, rhythmic glow of a lighthouse turning with patient grace. The mariner raised the gaze toward it, watching the light sweep the horizon. Each rotation felt less like a warning to ships and more like a heartbeat steady and soothing, a reminder that even in vastness, there were small anchors of warmth. The beam passed over the water, its silver arc gliding gently across the waves, catching and releasing reflections that shimmered like threads in the motion. With every turn, the mist deepened the glow, softening its edges, until the light seemed to breathe in rhythm with the ocean itself. The ship drifted nearer, though not by intention. The current carried it lightly toward that shore, guiding without insistence, as if the sea had remembered this place before the mariner had. No haste lived in this journey, only the serene unfolding of direction without demand. The mariner stood near the bow, the hem of the coat brushing the wood eyes, tracing the widening path of illumination that led through the mist. As the distance closed, the shape of the lighthouse began to form. First, a suggestion of verticality, then a faint line, then the full outline of its tall, weathered form. It rose from a low cluster of dark rocks, their edges softened by waves and moonlight. Around it, the sea gathered in gentle spirals, and foam lapped at its base with the sound of whispered applause. At the top, the lantern room shone with slow persistence, the glass panes blurring slightly where mist pressed its cool hands against them. The mariner watched as the light completed another turn, painting a circle across the sleeping sea. It was an old light, perhaps tended by no one, now yet still alive, a vessel of constancy. For a long moment, the mariner simply stood in quiet awe, feeling something kindred between the ship's small human lanterns and this towering one on the shore. Both carried the same devotion to remain steady in the dark, to offer gentleness, without asking for anything in return. The ship's hull sighed as it came into the shelter of the lighthouse's cove. Here the water grew shallower and even more peaceful, the motion of waves replaced by the faint rocking of reflected light. The mariner could hear new sounds now, the muted drip of water from rocks, the faint rustle of seagrass hidden among them, and somewhere far above, the faintest hum of the lamp turning. It was a music of continuity, each note low and slow, weaving comfort into the fabric of night. The mariner lowered the small anchor, the chain sliding out with a sound both solid and soft, like pebbles rolling gently across a beach. When it reached the seabed, there was no jolt, only the sensation of settling of arrival without disturbance. The ship exhaled into stillness, its timbers relaxing, its lanterns swaying in easy arcs. Above the lighthouse beam continued its steady rotation, sending light that brushed across the mariner's face in rhythmic intervals, bright, then dim, then bright again. Curiosity, mild and unhurried, stirred within the mariner's heart, not the restlessness of exploration, but the tender pull of recognition. Stepping carefully into the small boat tethered to the side, the mariner released the knot with a slow twist of rope. The boat rocked once, twice, and then began to drift toward the rocky shore. Oars moved through the water with almost no sound, cutting smooth lines that folded back into place as soon as they were made. The mist parted gently to make room for passage. It glowed faintly with the reflections of both moon and lighthouse, turning the space between into a kind of silver corridor. The scent of salt grew sharper here, mingled with the earthy aroma of wet stone and distant moss. Each breath drew that coolness inward, settling the body deeper into stillness, as if the sea itself were breathing with the mariner. When the boat reached the rocks, it touched softly like a sigh against the skin. The mariner stepped onto the shore boots, finding easy footing on slick stone, and began to walk toward the base of the lighthouse. The rocks were uneven, but familiar beneath the soles, their surfaces etched by countless tides and softened by time. Every step released a tiny sound, water sliding off edges, air escaping from hidden pockets, and the night seemed to hum in gentle acknowledgement. The lighthouse door stood slightly ajar, its wood grayed by wind and sea, its hinges silent with the kindness of age. The mariner pushed it open, and the interior welcomed with a breath of warmer air, scented faintly of oil and salt dust. Inside the space were simple stone walls, spiral stairs curling upward, a faint echo that moved slowly through the hollow column like a remembered song. Each step on the staircase sounded low and round, blending into the rhythm of the mariner's breathing. As the mariner climbed, small details revealed themselves in the lamplight that filtered down from above. A brass rail, dulled but still strong, the imprint of countless hands along its curve. Faint traces of soot near the top, where the lamp's heat had risen over years of quiet work. Every mark felt intimate, not as wear, but as history, gently kept alive. The mariner's hand glided over the rail palm, warm against the coolness of metal, tracing the soft undulations shaped by time. At last, the staircase opened into the lantern room, a circular chamber wrapped in glass, where the great light turned slowly within its frame. The machinery made no harsh sound, only a steady, contented hum, accompanied by the faint ticking of hidden gears. The lamp itself was magnificent in its simplicity. A single patient flame magnified by curved glass until it became a pulse of radiance touching sea and sky alike. The air was faintly warmer here, scented with burning oil, and the clean metallic tang of the sea wind brushing against glass. The mariner approached the central lamp, bowing the head slightly, not in reverence, but in recognition, one keeper meeting another. The flame's light brushed the mariner's face, softening its lines and glinting in the eyes like reflected starlight. For a long time, the mariner simply stood beside it, letting the rhythm of the lamp's rotation slow the heart, letting the world turn in its unbroken calm. Below, through the glass, the sea spread like an endless mirror, and the ship floated quietly, its tiny lanterns returning the lighthouse's glow with humble warmth. The mariner noticed a small table in the corner, a remnant of a life once lived here. On it rested a cup, an oilcloth, and a few folded pieces of paper, their edges curled and faintly brittle. One had been left open, its ink faded to a soft gray, but the handwriting still neat, deliberate. The mariner leaned closer, reading not with the eyes, but with the feeling of the words. It was not a message, nor a farewell, only a record of light tended faithfully. Turned at dusk, trimmed at dawn, it said, "The flame remains." A simple phrase, yet filled with quiet devotion, a promise between keeper and sea. The mariner smiled faintly, the corners of the mouth curving with warmth, as if the message had been waiting only to be acknowledged once more. Outside, the mist began to lift in long trailing ribbons. Through the glass panes, stars reappeared, each one mirrored perfectly in the still water below. The lighthouse beam moved slower now, its circle more languid, as though the night itself were growing sleepy. The mariner stood beside the great lamp, watching the reflections waver, feeling an immense peace spread outward like light, diffusing through the air. When it was time to descend, the mariner left the lamp untouched, steady, unwavering, alive. Each step downward felt lighter, as though carrying a piece of that constancy within. Back outside, the cool mist had thinned into a silvery haze that clung low to the rocks, shimmering with each sweep of the light. The mariner returned to the small boat, which waited exactly as it had been left, gently nudged by the sea's breathing. As the oars dipped once more into the calm water, the ship came into view through the glow of its own lanterns. They shimmered like a constellation, drawn close, golden reflections gathering beneath them. The lighthouse's beam swept across the sea one final time, passing over the mariner and the vessel before continuing into the horizon. It was not goodbye, only an exchange of light between kindred souls. The mariner climbed back aboard the ship, steady on the deck, now warmed by the lingering memory of the shore. The lanterns swayed softly in greeting their flames, steady as heartbeats. Far behind, the lighthouse glowed faintly through the mist, a steadfast star rising from the earth. The mariner turned once more toward it, then let the gaze drift away back to the sea, where the next story was already forming, quiet, unhurried, waiting beneath the waves. The sea had grown impossibly still, a mirror stretching into the dark without seam or edge. Moonlight shimmered across its quiet skin, silver ripples melting into one another until they became a single breathing surface. The ship floated there as if suspended in a dream, its lanterns swaying faintly, its sails resting like folded wings. No wind pressed against the canvas. No sound disturbed the space between sky and water. Only the rhythm of the mariner's slow heartbeat filled the hush, matching the sea's gentle pulse. The mariner stood at the rail once more, hands loose and open, feeling the moisture of the night cling to the skin. Each breath drawn carried the scent of salt and cool iron, with a faint sweetness of kelp rising from unseen depths. The eyes traced the horizon where the silver faded into ink, and a thought, soft, unspoken, passed through the mind like a ripple, that perhaps beneath the stillness, the ocean was not empty, but listening, waiting for its own stories to return. The mariner leaned forward slightly, watching the lantern's reflections drift upon the water. Each golden shape trembled, expanded, then reformed like the breath of the world in liquid form. Then slowly, too gently to startle, the surface began to change. Not with waves, but with faint movements, circular and soundless, as if something below had stirred just enough to create a pulse. The mariner's gaze softened, allowing the eyes to rest upon the motion without seeking reason. Tiny glimmers appeared beneath the ship's specks of light, pale green and silver swirling in slow formations. At first, they seemed random, but soon they moved in unison, curving into long, graceful lines that wove around one another. It was not a school of fish or any ordinary life of the sea. It was as though the water itself had decided to illuminate its own heartbeat to show what it remembered in the dark. The mariner's breath slowed again, watching the sea's secret language unfold in silence. From the depths, faint shapes emerged, not distinct, but shimmering like dreams, refusing to be fully seen. They glided just beneath the surface, casting trails of light behind them, long and fluid as ribbons of moonlit mist. Each shape appeared only for a moment before dissolving again, leaving the water to reclaim its mystery. They were not creatures of fear or myth, but of peace, fragments of memory perhaps, or the imagination of the ocean made visible. Their presence felt ancient, yet familiar, as though they had always been here quietly observing from below. The mariner closed the eyes for a breath, listening beyond the ordinary sounds of night. There, beneath the gentle slosh of water and the occasional creak of wood, another sound began to form, low, resonant, and deep. It was not music, not voice, but something that carried the feeling of both. A hum, faint and continuous, like the ocean thinking to itself. It rose and fell in long, slow phrases, matching the ebb and flow of the mariner's breath. The sound seemed to vibrate through the ship's hull, through the soles of boots, through the very bones. It wasn't loud, but it filled everything, wrapping the world in its gentle resonance. The mariner leaned on the railing and let it flow through the body, the vibration spreading like warmth through cold hands. In this shared hum, boundaries softened between air and water, between wood and skin, between thought and tide. The mariner became part of the sea's dream, a single note in its infinite song. For a long while, time felt like it had stopped breathing. The lantern flames barely moved, their reflections suspended, as if painted on glass. Only the faint glow beneath the waves continued to shift, spiraling outward in delicate spiraling motions, a dance of light that seemed choreographed by the ocean's own slow pulse. It was as if the sea were remembering something tender, replaying it for anyone still awake to see. The mariner watched not as an intruder, but as a witness to something sacred and unseen. One of the glowing forms drifted closer to the surface. Its outline shimmered, not quite fish, not quite mist, a gentle fluid curve that caught the moonlight and scattered it into 1,000 fine threads. It lingered near the hull, hovering just below the waterline, where its glow brushed against the wood. For a brief moment, the ship itself seemed to respond, its grain shining faintly as if absorbing the ocean's light. Then, with a single fluid motion, the form drifted away, leaving behind a faint trail that glowed like a sigh before fading back into darkness. The mariner's hand reached toward the surface, stopping just short of touching it. The air between palm and water was cool, filled with mist, so thin it could almost be mistaken for breath. Light shimmered in that small space, hovering between touch and reflection. It was enough not to grasp, but simply to know that connection existed, invisible yet complete. The mariner smiled faintly, eyes softened with wonder that carried no urgency, no question, only quiet gratitude. As the minutes passed, more glimmers rose and fell beneath the ship, small bursts, fleeting trails, waves of luminescence that rippled outward. They gathered and dispersed like thoughts moving through a half-dreaming mind. Sometimes they formed spirals, sometimes slow expanding circles, but always they returned to stillness. Even the water seemed to relax after each movement, returning to calm as naturally as breathing out after a long inhale. The sea had spoken in its language of light, and now it returned to listening. The mariner leaned back the coat, catching the faint dampness of the air, the body sinking into a state beyond thought. The low hum beneath the waves had faded, replaced by the simple rhythm of quiet water against quiet wood. Lanterns continued to glow gently along the rail, their light mingling with the faint lingering glimmers below. For a moment, it was hard to tell where sky ended and sea began. The reflection of stars and lanterns and bioluminescence had joined into one seamless constellation. The ship rested at the center of it all, a small island of warmth suspended in an ocean of peace. The mariner thought of how the sea carried everything, all stories, all memories, all forgotten voices, and yet never hurried to reveal them. Perhaps the mariner reflected this was how one should hold their own heart, not as a thing to empty or display, but as an ocean to cradle quietly, letting what needs to surface rise when it is ready. The thought lingered like a soft current beneath the ribs, neither heavy nor light, only true. A single droplet of water fell from the rigging above landing with a sound smaller than a heartbeat. It broke the reflection on the surface for an instant. Then the image reformed smoother than before. The mariner watched the ring it made a single perfect circle, expanding until it disappeared into the vast calm. That too felt like a story, brief, complete, and released without regret. Somewhere far below, another faint shimmer pulsed once more, not as bright this time, but deep and slow, like the echo of a thought. The mariner sensed it rather than saw it, a reminder that even when unseen life moved gently beneath the surface. It was comforting to know the depths held their own quiet rhythm, separate yet harmonious. Above and below, everything breathed in unison, sea ship and soul. The night, serene and endless, felt less like darkness and more like an embrace. The mariner turned one last glance toward the horizon. The mist had thinned, revealing the faint curve of distance where sea met sky. The moon hung higher now, its silver path stretching long and luminous, inviting yet never demanding. The glowing trails beneath the waves had nearly vanished, but their memory lingered faintly, woven into the eyes that had witnessed them. The mariner exhaled slowly, a breath that joined the seas, and let the body rest against the railing, feeling the pulse of stillness return. It was as if the ocean had whispered a secret not to be understood. but to be felt. Something about connection, about the unseen currents that bind everything, even in silence. The mariner, in that soft comprehension, closed the eyes and let the thought drift away, replaced by the sensation of belonging to the night, to the sea, to the quiet rhythm of being. The lanterns flickered once, as if sighing in contentment, and then steadied their light, pooling like golden breath along the deck. The ship, weightless in the calm, continued its slow drift. Nothing hurried, nothing reached. Above, the stars watched kindly. Below, the echoes of the sea continued their soft, wordless lullaby. And in the midst of it all, the mariner stood silent, still, and at peace, while the world shimmered with the quiet heartbeat of the deep. The dawn had not yet come, but the night had softened. The moon, once bright and high, now floated lower on the horizon. Its light turned to a gentle ivory glow. The sea was calm as ever, though its silence had changed. Beneath it moved a hum of life, the quiet shift of water preparing for morning. Above the deck, the air felt cooler. The scent of salt joined now by something earthy like seaweed drying on distant shores. The mariner stirred from stillness, eyes opening to a softer world. A faint melody carried across the water, so light that at first it might have been mistaken for the wind. It came in threads, rising and falling like a tide of breath, weaving between the steady hush of the sea. No instrument played it. It was human, though distant, a voice low and unhurried, singing not for an audience, but for the sea itself. The mariner listened, head tilted slightly, catching fragments of the song as they drifted near and faded again. It was the kind of tune that carried more feeling than words, something ancient, circular, without beginning or end. Drawn by quiet curiosity, the mariner walked toward the side of the deck where the sound seemed clearest. The ship rocked gently beneath each step, its planks exhaling soft creaks in reply. Out in the near distance, a small figure appeared, a solitary fisherman in a narrow wooden boat, casting a net wide across the moonlit water. The net spread like a silver fan, each thread glinting for a moment before sinking beneath the surface. Then the voice rose again, humming the same old melody, slow and steady as the sea's own rhythm. The mariner watched as the fisherman pulled the net back in hand over hand, the motion deliberate, tender, and patient. Drops of seawater sparkled as they fell from the cords, catching stray moonlight before dissolving back into the ocean. Nothing about the act spoke of a labor or hunger, only devotion, a ritual of belonging between human and sea. The mariner felt the body relax further, shoulders easing, breath deepening, as if the song itself were loosening the last knots of wakefulness. This was no working night. It was a night of communion. The fisherman's song grew a little clearer, Now the voice low and rounded the words, old enough to be almost forgotten. A tune of offering of gratitude for calm waters and unseen abundance. Though the mariner could not make out every phrase, the tone carried meaning enough. A thankfulness whispered to the vastness that held them both. Each repetition of the melody felt like the turning of waves, the returning of breath. The mariner's lips parted slightly, echoing the hum beneath the breath, barely audible, joining the sea's long, endless harmony. The lanterns aboard the ship swayed gently, their golden circles shifting across the deck. Within their glow, shadows of ropes and masts stretched and shortened in quiet rhythm. A faint mist had gathered low to the water again, its edges glowing softly where the lantern light met the moon. The entire scene, the fishermen, the song, the net, seemed to belong to a memory more than to waking life. And yet, it felt profoundly present, real, in the way peace is real, when it fills every space without sound. The mariner leaned on the railing, hands folded, eyes following the slow pull of the net. Here, the sea was not mysterious or deep. It was tender, generous, offering itself with each gentle swell. As the fisherman gathered the final edge of the net, the mariner noticed how the water clung to it, shimmering like glass beads in the half-light. The net came up almost empty, only a few shells caught in its web, a small gift from the ocean. The fisherman smiled faintly, visible only in silhouette, and hummed another verse. This one even slower, almost like a lullaby. The mariner felt something shift within. Not longing, not sadness, but an ache that came with beauty, too pure to hold. The song reminded the mariner of long-forgotten evenings, nights, when nets were cast not for survival, but for peace. Moments when the act of working with one's hands became a prayer, simple, rhythmic, wordless. It was that rhythm that lived on here, alive, in the fisherman's steady pull, in the water's patient reply, in the way moonlight slipped between net and wave. The mariner closed the eyes, allowing memory and present to merge like two tides, meeting quietly at dusk. When the eyes opened again, the fisherman was closer. He lifted a hand in quiet acknowledgement. Not greeting, not farewell. Just the meeting of two souls awake in the same silence. The mariner returned the gesture, a small movement that carried both gratitude and kinship. The fisherman's voice softened into hums again. The melody carried more by rhythm than tone, now blending with the soft slap of water against wood. The mariner thought that if the sea itself could breathe, it might sound exactly like this. The fisherman's net was cast once more. This time, it fell in a slow, deliberate arc, unfolding in the moonlight before descending. The mariner watched the ripples it left behind. concentric circles expanding outward, merging with those of the ship's hull. Each ring moved slower, wider, until the surface became still again, as though the water had accepted the offering and folded it into itself. The air, scented now with brine and oil, felt like silk against the mariner's skin. The mariner thought of how often in life things are released in hope, not knowing if they will return. A net, a word, a memory. Yet here, under the moon's calm gaze, even the act of casting seemed enough. It wasn't about catching. It was about being part of the movement, the cycle of giving and receiving, of letting go without loss. The mariner smiled softly, the kind of smile that lives in the heart more than the lips does. The fisherman's song grew fainter now, carried further by the current. He began to drift away, his small boat turning slightly toward the horizon, where the moon was lowering its reflection, stretching long across the water. The net trailed behind, like a line of quiet silver, dragging faintly through the still sea. The mariner watched until the figure became no more than a dark shape within the glow, then disappeared altogether into mist. Yet the melody remained a low hum, still lingering in the air, as though the water itself had remembered it. The mariner remained at the rail for a while, eyes on the place where the song had vanished. There was no emptiness there, only fullness, a calm that filled everything, as if the silence itself were humming. The sea gleamed softly. The lanterns mirrored perfectly on its skin. Each reflection quivered faintly, forming threads of gold that connected sky to watership to memory. The mariner took a deep, slow breath, feeling the lungs fill with air that smelled of salt peace and the faint sweetness of dawn drawing near. Somewhere deep below, the faintest shimmer appeared again, perhaps the last of the glowing currents from before. It curled beneath the ship like a ghost of light, spiraling once before fading. The mariner followed its motion with the eyes, imagining it as the sea's quiet applause for the fisherman's song. Perhaps, thought the mariner, the ocean did not merely echo sound. Perhaps it kept it, carrying it forever in its shifting depths. The idea felt both vast and comforting, like knowing that nothing truly disappears. It only changes form. With a final glance at the water, the mariner turned from the rail. The deck creaked gently underfoot, the lanterns swaying as if nodding to the rhythm of some silent tune still hovering in the air. The mariner reached one hand to steady a swinging chain, feeling the slight warmth of metal beneath the cool night. The chain stilled the flame inside the lantern, steady once more, its light strong but calm. The mariner whispered something wordless into the quiet, perhaps a thank you, perhaps a continuation of the song, and let it drift away. The ship remained wrapped in its hush, floating between sea and sky. Behind it, The fisherman's melody had become memory. Ahead, the ocean waited, glimmering with possibilities unseen. The mariner took a seat near the center of the deck, feeling the wood beneath like an old friend's shoulder, solid and reassuring. Hands rested loosely in the lap, the mind unburdened, the body cradled by rhythm and breath. Above, the stars flickered softly, as though echoing the faint notes that still lingered, invisible yet alive. The mariner's thoughts drifted back to the nets, to the act of casting, pulling, and resting. There was peace in those cycles, a lesson whispered quietly into every life that effort and stillness, giving and receiving, are simply two movements of the same tide. The mariner felt the truth of that, deep in the chest, where the heartbeat matched the soft lapping of the water below. For a long while, nothing moved. Not the sails, not the lanterns, not even thought itself. Everything rested perfectly balanced in the music of the sea. By the time the moon had lowered into its final arc, the first pale hint of dawn had begun to breathe across the horizon. Not yet light, only a change in the darkness. The faintest silver blue deepening along the line where sea met sky. The mariner stared at the shift eyes, opening to the subtle transformation that the night itself seemed reluctant to end. The sea, still smooth as glass, reflected this tender brightness with quiet grace, as though mirroring the gentle promise of morning. A cool wind whispered through the rigging, carrying with it the scent of salt and something faintly wooden, like the memory of faraway shores. The mariner moved to the side of the deck, drawn by a flicker on the water's edge. There, drifting slowly toward the ship, came a small collection of objects, riding the tide, fragments of driftwood seaweed and the soft glint of a glass bottle catching the lantern's light. Each moved at its own pace, carried by invisible hands through the still water. The mariner leaned forward, watching them draw near, these quiet offerings from the sea's long night. They arrived without haste, as though they had been traveling toward this meeting for a very long time. The mariner lowered a rope net over the side, letting it sink just beneath the surface. The movement was slow and careful. Even the smallest splash would have felt out of place in the fragile hush of dawn. When the fragments reached the net, the mariner lifted them gently from the water, the wood slick and smooth, the glass cool against the skin. Each piece glimmered with droplets that reflected the faintest colors of the waking sky. It was as if the ocean had written its own small letters and sent them adrift to be found. The mariner laid the pieces on the deck one by one, arranging them near the light of the lantern. There were 3 small blocks of wood, a loop of woven seagrass, and a bottle sealed with wax, inside of which something pale seemed to rest. The mariner's hands lingered above them for a moment, letting the air dry the faint traces of salt before touching the glass. The fingers, steady and patient, broke the seal with a soft crack that echoed faintly across the still water. Inside the bottle was a small folded paper, worn but intact. The mariner coaxed it out carefully, letting it fall into the open palm. The paper was thin and translucent, creased by years of travel, and smelled faintly of brine and sunlight. Unfolding it revealed only a few lines, handwritten in faded ink. The words almost gone, but enough to suggest the remnants of care for whoever finds this. May the sea bring you peace. The mariner read the message twice the second time, more slowly tracing each curve of ink, as if following a familiar melody. It wasn't a plea nor a story, just a wish cast into the unknown, trusting the currents to deliver it someday. The mariner smiled faintly, the expression small and sincere, as though the sea had spoken directly through another's hand. Then, after a quiet moment, the mariner folded the paper once more and placed it back into the bottle, sealing it gently with a bit of melted wax from the lantern's base. Some messages the mariner thought were meant to continue drifting. Turning to the pieces of driftwood, the mariner picked one up, long and pale, its surface smoothed by time and water. The grain of the wood shimmered faintly in the low light lines, curling like waves, frozen mid-motion. With a fingertip, the mariner traced a faint carving near one end. Not words, just a simple shape, perhaps made by a hand long ago. It could have been a leaf or a feather, or maybe just the curve of the sea itself. Whatever it was, it had endured, softened, worn, but still there, a whisper of intention that the water had chosen to preserve. The mariner set the driftwood down beside the bottle and lifted another. This one was darker, heavier, still damp in places where the sea clung to it. When turned, it revealed a smooth patch where something had once been attached, a handle perhaps, or a nail now long gone. It bore no carvings, only texture, yet it held its own quiet beauty, the elegance of something that had surrendered its purpose and become instead a work of stillness. The mariner's hands moved slowly, turning it in the lantern light, admiring the way the glow slid over its surface like moonlight over calm water. The final piece was small, no larger than a palm, but its edges were unusually sharp for driftwood. Across its surface ran a faint streak of paint, sea green, the color of shallow waters under morning sun. The mariner rubbed it lightly, feeling the texture change beneath the fingertip. Perhaps it had once belonged to a boat or a dock, or something built with care by other hands. Now it was free, no longer belonging, but still beautiful in its independence. Gathering the three pieces together, the mariner arranged them in a small circle around the bottle. The sight of them, simple, worn, and luminous in the quiet, filled the space with a hush deeper than silence. They were in their way a conversation, fragments of lives, once separate now brought together by tide and chance. The mariner crouched beside them, feeling a soft kinship with these remnants that had traveled far without knowing where they might arrive. Perhaps every being was a kind of driftwood, shaped and softened by the same patient hand of time. A faint creak from the hull reminded the mariner that the sea too was listening. The ship floated steady in the dim light, the lanterns flickering just enough to hint at the beginning of dawn's approach. The mariner poured a bit of the still warm tea from earlier into a small tin cup and set it on the deck near the circle of driftwood, a quiet offering not to gods or spirits, but to the sea itself. The steam rose in delicate curls, dissolving quickly into the chill air, leaving behind only scent and intention. The mariner whispered something simple under the breath, a thank you that needed no words. After a moment, the mariner lifted one of the driftwood pieces and tossed it gently overboard. It hit the surface without sound, floating easily, turning in slow circles as it was taken by the current. The mariner followed it with the eyes until it merged into the glimmer of dawn light stretching across the water. Then another piece followed, and then the third, each released with the same calm deliberation. When the last disappeared from view, the mariner reached for the bottle, holding it one final time before lowering it carefully into the sea. The bottle slipped beneath the surface for a moment, then rose again, bobbing lightly in the water. The mariner watched as it drifted away, its glass catching the first color of morning. It glowed briefly gold at the edges, pale blue at its center, before it turned and became one with the slow-moving tide. Somewhere out there, it would continue to travel, carrying its quiet wish for peace to whoever needed to find it next. The mariner's heart felt lighter, as if some unseen weight had also been set free. The sea itself seemed to respond. A faint shimmer passed beneath the ship, like a sigh of acknowledgement. Then the water grew still again, the reflection of the sky deepening into blue-gray as dawn unfurled above. The first trace of sunlight touched the waves, spreading warmth through the air, mixing with the scent of salt and wood. The mariner closed the eyes, breathing deeply, letting the world feel full again. No longer waiting, no longer wanting. The ship remained quiet, but its presence felt alive. A gentle vessel between worlds, carrying not just a traveler, but stories the sea had chosen to remember. The mariner brushed a hand along the railing fingers, tracing the tiny droplets that had settled there. Each one caught a fragment of sunrise glinting before vanishing into air. The world was renewing itself, moment by moment, and the mariner stood as witness, unhurried, serene part of the rhythm that bound sky to sea, water to wind, and life to its own drifting path. As the first light brightened the horizon, the mariner turned from the rail and walked toward the cabin. A new day was gently unfolding, but not to replace the night, rather to continue it in another form. Inside, the soft shadows shifted into gold, and the scent of tea wood and salt lingered like a blessing. Outside, the ocean carried the driftwood letters onward, gliding across the endless water toward unknown shores. Each piece, each wave, each ripple whispered the same refrain: nothing is ever truly lost, only carried forward by the tide. The mariner paused in the doorway one last time, watching the line of light expand across the sea. It stretched toward infinity, calm and patient, as though inviting all things, stories, dreams, and travelers alike, to rest upon its surface. The mariner smiled, feeling the stillness settle deeper within. All that had been found, all that had been released, now belonged to the same ocean of memory and peace. And in that understanding, the mariner breathed once more, soft and slow, as the morning opened its hands to the waiting sea. The morning had unfolded fully now, yet its light remained soft, the kind of gold that does not dazzle but glows gently through mist. The sea, touched by this warmth, shimmered faintly with ripples that seemed to breathe in rhythm with the wind. The ship drifted slowly toward a distant curve of land, faint against the horizon, a quiet harbor still veiled in morning haze. Its outline was tender and familiar, though the mariner could not say whether it was truly known or only remembered by the heart. Either way, it felt like arrival, not the kind that ends a journey, but the kind that completes a circle. As the ship approached, the water grew shallower, its color shifting from deep silver blue to a translucent green, where sunlight reached the sand below. The mariner leaned over the rail, watching small fish dart through these bright depths, their movements gentle and unafraid. The air grew sweeter, carrying the faint scent of pine and wildflowers that grew along unseen cliffs. Every breath felt lighter now, as though the weight of the sea had been exchanged for the softness of land's embrace. The mariner smiled, feeling that same shift within, from wandering to belonging. At the harbor's edge, a row of weathered posts rose from the water, their tops wrapped with old rope and faded cloth. A few seabirds perched upon them, their white feathers luminous in the morning light. They watched the approaching ship with calm curiosity, tilting their heads slightly as the vessel glided nearer. The mariner felt a quiet joy at their presence, those little guardians of threshold between sea and shore. They seemed to murmur in soft calls, as though welcoming an old friend back from a long voyage. The ship entered the cove without a sound. The water here was smooth as silk, disturbed only by the gentle wake trailing behind. The mariner felt the air grow stiller, the sounds of the open ocean fading into the hush of a sheltered place. It was the sound of peace, made visible the silence that exists when the world has paused to listen. The mariner breathed deeply, feeling that calm settle through the body like sunlight through glass. When the ship came to rest, its movement ceased so gently that even the lanterns did not sway. The mariner lowered the anchor, its descent muffled by the clear, shallow water below. The chain made a low, comforting murmur as it coiled, then quieted once more. For the first time since the voyage began, everything was utterly still. The mariner stood at the center of the deck, eyes half closed, heart beating in time with the steady rhythm of rest. Along the inner curve of the harbor, the light deepened to a warm amber. It touched the rocks, the reeds, and the small wooden dock that waited unused but well kept. Beyond it, faint paths disappeared into low dunes where seagrass moved in slow, whispering waves. Each blade bent and rose again in rhythm with the wind, echoing the same soft resilience the mariner had found in the sea. Everything here seemed to breathe together wind, water, and heart. The mariner stepped down into the small boat once more, hands steady on the oars. The motion of rowing felt familiar, effortless. The wooden handles smooth beneath calloused palms. The surface of the water parted quietly, closing again behind the oars with the grace of silk folding upon itself. Each stroke brought the boat closer to the dock, the scent of earth and wild herbs growing stronger with every breath. When the keel touched the wood, the sound was so soft it could have been mistaken for the sigh of the tide. Stepping onto the dock, the mariner paused, feeling the subtle shift beneath the feet, from the living motion of sea to the steady heart of land. The boards, sun-bleached and warm, creaked gently in greeting. A low hum of bees reached from the dunes nearby, and somewhere hidden among the grasses, a bird sang a single rising note before falling quiet again. The harbor seemed alive, but in no rush to prove it. Everything moved at the pace of breath of time stretched thin by peace. The mariner stood a while, letting that rhythm seep inward. At the far end of the dock, an old bench waited beneath a wooden arch, grown over with vines. Its paint had faded to a soft blue-gray, and along its edge, seashells had been pressed into the surface, their pale shapes glinting in the sunlight. The mariner sat upon it, the wood warm beneath the palms, the air fragrant with sea and flowers mingling. Here, there was nothing to do, only to be. The sea murmured behind the breeze, whispered ahead, and time itself seemed to slow its turning from this quiet seat. The mariner could see both ocean and shore, each reflecting the other's calm. The ship lay at anchor in the center of the cove, its lanterns now dim in daylight, but still glinting faintly like memories not yet faded. Seabirds glided over the water, their reflections trailing behind them in soft, dissolving lines. Somewhere near the dunes, the faint sound of trickling water could be heard, a spring or small stream finding its way to the sea. The mariner smiled, recognizing that even here, movement continued, gentle, unending, natural. Leaning back against the bench, the mariner closed the eyes and listened to the harbor's heart. The sound was not one, but many. The hum of insects, the sigh of grass, the rhythmic touch of waves against wood. Each layer blended with the others until it became one continuous lullaby, the kind sung not to put one to sleep, but to remind one that rest is already here. The mariner felt the body loosen further, every muscle unwinding, every breath deeper and slower. The air itself seemed to cradle the lungs, the warmth seeping in until even thought became weightless. A single leaf drifted down from the vines above, landing soundlessly beside the mariner's hand. Its color was pale green with a hint of silver, almost transparent, where the light passed through it. The mariner picked it up between two fingers, turning it slowly. The veins of the leaf resembled tiny rivers branching and meeting again, mirroring the patterns of the sea itself. It felt like a message not written but understood. The mariner held the leaf a moment longer, then let it fall into the water below. It floated beside the dock, caught in a slow current that drew it gently toward the open sea. Its journey would be simple and unhurried, carried by tides, the way all things are eventually carried. The mariner watched it drift until it became only a speck of color upon the water. A peace deeper than words settled in the chest, calm and complete. The sun had now risen fully above the horizon, yet its warmth remained tender, filtered through the last of the morning mist. Light played across the surface of the harbor, creating small diamonds that danced upon the waves. The mariner lifted a hand to shade the eyes, smiling at the shimmer of it all, how even light seemed to move in rhythm with the heart. Everything in sight of the ship, the dock, the sea, the sky belonged to one breath, one stillness, one endless moment. And in that realization, there was no separation left, only harmony. When the mariner finally rose from the bench, it was not with reluctance, but with the kind of ease that comes from deep understanding. The ship awaited quietly, but there was no urgency to return. Every journey, the mariner knew now, is both departure and homecoming. Each harbor not an end, but a reflection of the peace one carries within. The mariner took one last look around, letting the eyes rest on every color, every glint of sunlight, every slow-moving wave. Then turning toward the sea once more, The mariner whispered a silent thank you to the harbor, to the water, and to the quiet heart of the world. The mariner stepped into the boat again, hands closing gently around the oars. Each pull sent ripples gliding outward, the reflections of sky and ship merging once more. Behind the dock grew smaller, the vines and flowers fading into the haze. Yet their peace remained not left behind, but carried forward. Ahead, the ship waited in calm patience, its mast shining softly under the sun. The mariner felt the same sunlight on the face and thought with serene certainty that no matter where the tides would lead next, the harbor's quiet heart would always remain within. Evening had returned gentle, unannounced, like a familiar visitor, arriving without sound. The ship now rested where it had begun, floating upon the same quiet water, though everything had changed in some subtle way. The air was warm, touched by the memory of sunlight, but cooling softly with dusk. Lanterns glowed once more along the rail, their golden light deepening as the sky faded from blue to indigo. Each flame burned steady, mirrored in the calm sea below the same lights that had guided the mariner through every whisper and tide. The mariner stood at the bow again, where the first story of the night had begun. The coat, faintly dusted with salt, caught the lamplight in its folds. The air around carried the faint fragrance of the day's passing pine seaweed and distant flowers from the harbor, now hidden by mist. A hush had settled over the water, that kind of silence that carries meaning rather than emptiness. The mariner's gaze lifted toward the horizon, where the last of the sun lingered, fading in a slow ribbon of rose and gold. The sea reflected it tenderly, holding color as one holds a memory before letting it go. Slowly, as twilight deepened, the first stars began to appear, hesitant then, certain scattered across the sky like thoughts returning after meditation. The moon rose soon after pale, and round its light cool against the gentle warmth of the lanterns. It painted the ship's deck in silver, tracing the ropes, the masts, the mariner's calm silhouette. The air hummed softly with the blended sounds of night, the distant cry of a gull, the rhythmic hush of waves, the faint creak of the ship easing into its anchor's hold. The world had resumed its nocturnal breathing, slow and deep. The mariner reached for the same cup as always, the one shaped from wood and years of travel, and filled it once more with tea. Steam rose, curling in slender ribbons that caught the moonlight before fading into invisibility. Each breath drawn over its surface smelled faintly herbal sweet and earthy, carrying a trace of mint and salt. The first sip was not taken for taste, but for the pause it required, the small act of stopping a presence. Time loosened further, dissolving like sugar in warm water. Walking slowly to the railing, the mariner let the gaze fall upon the sea once more. The lanterns swayed in soft unison, their reflections forming a golden path that reached far into the distance. It looked almost solid, that trail of light, as though one could walk across it barefoot into forever. The mariner smiled faintly at the thought, remembering the fisherman's song, the glowing shapes beneath the waves, the lighthouse's patient eye. Each moment returned now not as separate tales, but as one long exhale of the ocean's memory. The mariner set the cup down beside the rail and leaned upon it, palms pressed against the cool, smooth wood. Fingers traced familiar grooves carved by weather and time, each one an unspoken sentence in the language of endurance. The ship seemed to breathe again beneath those hands, the faint shifting of timbers, the pulse of the tide beneath its hull. Every sound, every motion, every glint of light belonged to a single living stillness. Nothing needed to be said, for the story was complete, simply by being lived. A low wind passed across the sea, barely enough to ripple the surface. It brushed against the mariner's face, lifted a few strands of hair, and carried with it the scent of salt and night jasmine from the unseen shore. Above clouds moved slowly, silver-edged and soft as silk. The moon's reflection quivered for a moment, then stilled again, as if the sky and sea had agreed to share their calm. The mariner's breath followed that rhythm, each inhale and exhale dissolving a little more of the waking world. Looking upward, the mariner thought of all the lights tended through the journey, those small circles of flame that marked each chapter of the night. They had burned for memory, for hope, for belonging. Now they burned simply because they could. Because light in its truest form needs no reason. The mariner's eyes softened, tracing each one in turn, the lanterns, the moon, the stars, and finally the faint glow of the horizon where night met its quiet reflection. The world shimmered in its own stillness, every element aware of every other. A memory surfaced, gentle and complete, of the lighthouse and the keeper who had once written, "Turned at dusk, trimmed at dawn, the flame remains." The mariner whispered the words into the air, barely more than breath. And in that whisper, the ship seemed to understand the sea, to echo it, the lanterns to sway in quiet agreement. It was a vow shared across time to keep the light, to let it shine softly, never urgently, never in demand, but always there for whoever might wander close. The mariner's eyes closed, and the body leaned easily against the railing, as though resting in the arms of that vow. The tea beside the mariner had cooled its steam gone, leaving the faint reflection of the moon on its surface. It looked like a second sky captured in the small circle of the cup, The same stars, the same calm. The mariner lifted it once more and drank the last sip, letting the coolness slide through, grounding the body in the quiet of now. Beyond the ship, the ocean stretched endlessly, no longer a place to travel, but a presence to rest within. Every ripple shimmered with silver, every whisper carried the same refrain. All journeys are homecomings in disguise. The mariner turned toward the cabin, moving slowly, footsteps echoing lightly across the deck. Inside, the air was warm with lamplight. The logbook lay open where it had been left, the last page half filled with careful handwriting. The mariner dipped a pen into ink, hesitated, and then wrote a single line across the page. Anchored in moonlight, all is well. The pen was set down, the ink left to dry. The mariner blew out the lamp, leaving only the soft illumination of the moon through the porthole. Outside, the ship rocked gently, a lullaby woven by sea and wind together. The mariner lay down upon the narrow bunk, feeling the world tilt and settle with each quiet movement. The mind emptied of story, leaving only rhythm, breath, and light. Through the open porthole, the night's air entered softly, cool and fragrant. The sea whispered in the background, not words, but comfort, the way a mother might hum to a sleeping child. Lanterns flickered one by one, growing dim, their glow thinning into the broader radiance of moonlight. Above, stars swam slowly across the heavens, each carrying the quiet assurance that nothing is ever truly lost. Everything drifts, everything returns, everything rests. The ship, the sea, and the mariner became one, a trinity of stillness, breathing together beneath the eternal sky. Time folded upon itself, past and present, journey and rest, sound and silence, all dissolved into one continuous hush. And in that hush, the mariner slept not as escape, but as reunion. The sea rocked gently beneath the moon, stood watch above, and the lantern's faint afterglow lingered like the final warmth of a story remembered. Nothing stirred, nothing needed to. All was well. The mariner dreamed not of places or people, but of light itself, patient and eternal, flowing through water and sky alike. Each dream began and ended in calm, echoing the same truth. The sea had whispered since the first night that peace is not something to find, but something that was always there, waiting quietly to be felt. And so, under a sky woven with stars and silver waves, the moonlit mariners' tales came to their rest. Not ended only, paused, until another night, another dream, another listener drifts across the same gentle sea. The ship lay still, anchored in moonlight, surrounded by silence vast and kind. And as the world exhaled, the ocean hummed its final lullaby, carrying it far into the night, where sleep begins and stories never end. Sleep well, dream softly, and may the night hold you kindly.